The soft gush of water from the leaking kitchen sink was almost a lullaby. I sat by the window watching raindrops race down the glass pane, blurring the outside into an impressionist painting. It was one of those rainy afternoons that begged for a cup of tea and a good book. But my house was filled with an unsettling. My husband was away on a business trip, and the quiet was pressing in on me, amplifying the steady drip from the sink. That's when he arrived. The repairman was as sudden as a burst of sunlight through storm. His presence filled the space, chasing away the gloom that had settled in my bones. When our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us. It wasn't just the acknowledgement of a service rendered or a payment received. It was a silent understanding of two souls recognizing each other in the vast expanse of the universe. I paid him for his work and watched him leave. The encounter seemed like a mere blip on the radar of my life, yet it left an inexplicable tremor in its wake. The memory of the repairman lingered in my thoughts like a half-remembered dream. The echo of his footsteps in my hallway, the ghost of his touch as he tightened the last bolt under the sink. It was as if he brought with him a melody that now played on repeat in the chambers of my heart. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang again, and there he was, all smiles and apologies. Apparently, he needed to recheck the sink. My heart did a little skip as he stepped into my home. This time, our conversation flowed more easily, weighted by his gentle touches as he examined the pipes. It wasn't just the warmth of his personality that filled the room, but also a growing awareness of the electricity crackling between us. He teased me about my lack of domestic skills, and I laughed, surprised by how lighthearted I felt in his presence. Something about his straightforwardness, his gentle smile, the way he looked at me. It all combined into a heady mix that made my senses spin. When he stood up to leave, our fingers brushed, felt a jolt shoot through my arm. As he walked away, I found myself leaning against the doorframe, watching him go. My gaze lingered on his broad shoulders, the way his shirt strained against his biceps, and then I caught myself, startled by the intensity of my own thoughts. I shook my head, wondering where these feelings were coming from and why they were suddenly surfacing. It was late afternoon when he came. The sky was bruised with the promise of a storm, and there he was, standing on my porch, a sheepish grin on his face. The sink, it seemed, was still playing games. And as we worked together to turn off the water supply, our hands met again. This time, his grip was firm, his touch lingering just a fraction too long. And oh, how the tension built in those few seconds as our eyes locked! There was an unspoken question in his gaze, a silent plea. For what? I wasn't sure. But the answer, whatever it was, seemed to be trapped on the tip of my tongue. I led him to the backyard, and as we stood there amidst the growing darkness, the rain finally let loose, drumming on the roof and washing away the boundaries between us. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch him, to bridge the space that separated us. But something held me back, a fear of losing him, perhaps, or primal instinct that whispered of consequences. As quickly as it started, it stopped. The rain abated, leaving behind the scent of petrichor and a sky washed clean. He looked at me, his eyes stared, and I saw in them a reflection of my own turmoil. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression turned professional again. He offered me a fight, one that didn't quite reach his eye. As I stood there watching him go, I wondered if the storm within me had mirrored the one in the sky. If he, too, had felt the shift, the crackling energy that had woven its way around us. I knew then that this was only the beginning. The melt set in motion within me had become a siren's call that echoed in the chambers of my heart, beckoning me towards an unknown shore. My husband's absence stretched on, and with each passing day, the repairman's visits became a highlight in my otherwise mundane routine. It was as if he'd inserted into the fabric of my life, becoming an unexpected yet cherished fixture. Yet, beneath the surface, a turmoil brewed. The encounters with the repairman were carving a deep furrow of guilt and obsession into my soul. I found myself replaying our moments over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every touch, every look. The space where my heart used to reside was now a battleground, a war between the sanctity of my marriage and the undeniable pull I felt towards this man to embody both my salvation and damnation. Then one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, a thought struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. I looked down at a symbol of commitment and love, and realized I hadn't even taken it off since the repairman's first visit. It was as if my body, my very being, was holding on to something intangible, desperately trying to anchor me to the present, to the reality of my marriage. The nights were the worst, with my husband away, the silence of the house by the echoes of his laughter, the phantom feel of his hand on mine. Sleep, distant luxury, replaced by endless hours spent staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks and the blemishes like a madman counting sheep. But it wasn't just the memories that haunted me. It was also the anticipation. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside my window made me jump, wondering if he was there, if he was close. Was he thinking of me as I thought of him? The questions swirled in my head, each one pulling me deep in the abyss of my own obsession. And then he reappeared as if summoned by my thoughts. I hadn't heard his car pull up outside. I didn't hear him let in. I was lost in the labyrinth of my thoughts. When I felt his presence behind me, I turned slowly, and there he was, his silhouette by the setting sun, streaming in through the window. His eyes, those intense, enigmatic eyes, were searching, probing, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't there by accident. He'd come because of what I was feeling, because he, too, was caught in the undertow of our unspoken desires. You shouldn't be here, I whispered, the words catching in my throat, but it wasn't just him. I was talking to the monster he'd awakened within me. Why aren't you in Paris? I asked, referring to my husband's location, knowing full well that he was here because he, too, felt the magnetic pull of our unfinished symphony. Stepped closer and my breath hitched. I could ask you the same, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that reverberated through me. His eyes never left mine, and I to maintain my composure. It was as if he'd broken some ancient law, barging into my sanctum, shattering the fragile equilibrium I'd been clinging to. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the silence caught like a drumhead before a storm. It was deafening. He reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek, and a jolt shot through me. It was as if an electric current had been turned on, charging every fiber of my being with raw energy. I breathed. The word a mere wisp of sound, yet it held the weight of my desperation. He didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even blink. He just stood there, his gaze boring into mine, trying to pry open the gates of my soul. And in that moment, I knew there was no escape. I was lost, and finding myself in his eyes was both too exhilarating. Suddenly, he stiffened, as if jolted by some unseen force. His hand fell away from my face, his eyes clouded with a deep sadness. I have to, he said, the words barely audible. And just like that, he vanished. The front door closed softly, as if to muffle his departure. I stood there, my hands still hovering over my chest, my heart pounding a wild tattoo against my ribs. The encounter had been so intense, charged with emotion, that I felt as though I'd been stripped bare, laid open on a dissecting table for the universe to examine. In the aftermath, I felt exposed. But beneath that, something else. Something that came to elation. The giddy thrill of having brushed against the precipice, the edge of something profound and dangerous. And then the texts started pouring in. In the early hours of the morning when the silence of the night was thickest, each message a tiny tremor that rattled me to my core. He sent pictures. At first, it was a trickle, a casual selfie here, a picture of his calloused hands there. But then the deluge came, flooding my phone, drowning me in images of his smiling face, his muscular arms, his lean torso. I should have been repulsed, disgusted even, yet I found myself strangely drawn to them. Each text, each photograph was like a brushstroke on a canvas, slowly forming a portrait of a man who lived in my thoughts, in my dreams, and now in my waking hours as well. One stormy night, the power went out, plunging my house into darkness. I was alone, so I thought, when suddenly the front door opened. He stood silhouetted against the light from the porch lamp, his face obscured by the shadows. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice a low growl in the darkness. "But you don't have to be." "Not with me!" Before I could react, he was upon me, hands gripping my arms, his thumbs digging into my skin. "You belong to me now," he whispered, his breath hot on my ear. In a panic, I searched for the door, my fingers scrabbling on the wall. Then I saw it, the duplicate key he made. The one I'd slipped into the bowl on the entryway table. Hope surged. I grabbed the key and flung it to the floor, the sound echoing in the darkness. Leave? I whispered, my voice shaking. Get out. He hesitated, his grip on my arm slackening. Are you sure? He murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking at the realization that I wasn't sure at all. He didn't ask me why I was crying. He didn't try to hold me. He just stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching, pleading, and walked away, leaving me in the dark. The silence deafening. I stood there for a long time, the duplicate key lying on the floor at my feet, the power still out, the darkness pressing in on me, suffocating me. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through the cracks in the curtains, I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, my eyes closed. As I drifted into sleep, I whispered to myself, I'm scared, and even in my own ears, my voice sounded like his, because in the quiet of my heart, I knew he was still there, waiting for me, knowing that I was waiting for him.